She stood alone on the training field. So why did it feel like the entire base was watching her breathe? The Wyoming morning hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet. Cold enough to bite, warm enough to promise heat later. Sergeant Grace Mallory stood at ease, boots planted in the dust, tank top dark with sweat even this early. Bruises marked her arms and collarbone like old maps, yellowed edges, deep purples beneath. The kind of marks that didn't come from one mistake, but from months of refusing to stop. She felt them more than she showed. Every breath tugged gently at ribs that had healed crooked. Every step reminded her that pain never really leaves. It just learns when to be quiet. "Nice bruises, princess," a voice cut through the formation, too loud, too pleased with itself. Didn't know Fort Kessler had spa days. A few chuckles rippled, not cruel laughter. Worse, casual, comfortable. Private Wade Huxley leaned back into line, smirk wide, eyes scanning for approval. Grace didn't turn, didn't blink. She stared straight ahead, jaw relaxed, shoulders square. She had learned long ago that reacting fed people like him. Silence starved them. "How many push-ups does it take to snap a wrist, Sarge?" Huxley continued. "Or did you trip over your own ego again?" Her knuckles tightened behind her back, not in anger, in memory. The field blurred for half a second, replaced by white snow and red stains, by the sound of breathing that wasn't keeping up. She pushed it down. Now wasn't then. She was here. She stayed still. She could feel eyes on her, some curious, some dismissive. She was new. The only female assigned to Bravo Squad in 2 years. No one knew why she'd been transferred in. Special directive, the paperwork said. That phrase invited imagination, weakness, favor, pity. Grace let them think it. Let them build whatever story helped them sleep. From a small rise beyond the perimeter, General Thomas Barkley watched, hands clasped behind his back. He'd seen that posture before, not defiance, not pride, endurance. The kind that didn't ask permission. He didn't intervene, not yet. Grace felt the sun catch the thin scar beneath her left eye, almost surgical, a reminder she never forgot. She didn't defend herself, didn't look away, because she knew something they didn't. Respect earned in silence lasts longer than applause. Then the general spoke. "Call sign Widow 27. The field tightened. Laughter died mid-breath. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. Huxley blinked. "Widow what?" General Barkley stepped forward, boots slow against dirt. "You just ran your mouth at Widow 27, son." Something shifted, not just quiet, recognition, like a door opening to a room no one wanted to enter. Someone near the back whispered, "No way." Another swallowed hard. Widow 27 wasn't a person. It was a story. A rumor passed between units late at night. A name attached to worst-case scenarios. A woman who went dark on comms for 5 days and came back dragging a wounded teammate through enemy fire. That was a myth. Wasn't it? Grace stared forward, heart steady, hands clenched so tight her nails bit skin. She hadn't asked for this moment. She never did. Barkley's voice was calm. "Have any of you heard of Operation Ghost Line?" No one answered. 4 years ago, he continued, a 7-person recon unit was dropped behind the land divide, 48-hour mission. It turned into 8 days. Grace was back there now, snow crunching, breath burning, time stretching thin. They were ambushed on day 2, 2 gone instantly. 1 bled out before sunrise, 1 vanished. She remembered the sound of the explosion more than the sight, how the world went quiet after. "That left 3, Barkley said. 1 with shrapnel in his chest, 1 unconscious, and her." The field didn't move. Grace's vision narrowed. She felt the weight again. The drag of makeshift straps cutting into her shoulders. The voice behind her barely there, "If I pass out, don't stop." She carried them, Barkley said. No evac, no support, 12 miles of ice and shadow. Grace's throat tightened. She had crawled the last stretch. Hands numb, body done, but stopping had never been an option. "You think she came back for glory?" Barkley asked. She came back because not everyone who walks out of fire leaves the fire behind. No one laughed now. Eyes dropped, not in fear but in understanding. She could have walked away, Barkley went on. Taken honors, taken rest, but she asked to come back to train you. Grace felt something unfamiliar then, not pride, relief. The truth was out. She no longer had to carry it alone. Later in the mess hall she sat by herself. Habit more than choice. Trays clattered softly. Voices stayed low. One by one recruits joined her table. No apologies, no speeches, just presence. "Why widow 27?" someone whispered. Grace didn't look up. "Because I've buried 26 of my team," she said evenly. "I'm number 27. Silence followed, not empty, respectful. She ate slowly. For the first time since returning to Fort Kessler, she wasn't alone. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the room feel heavier the moment the lights went out? The mess hall dimmed as evening settled over Fort Kessler, fluorescent lights humming softer than before. Grace noticed it immediately, the way sound changed when people stopped filling silence with noise. Plates scraped more gently. Laughter died young. Even boots against tile seemed careful, as if the bass itself had learned something that morning and hadn't figured out how to carry it yet. She sat at the same table long after the others drifted away, not because she wanted solitude, but because stillness had become a language she trusted. Her tray was nearly empty. She hadn't tasted the food. Eating was muscle memory now, fuel, nothing more. Across the room, conversations kept breaking apart when she lifted her eyes, not because they feared her, because they didn't know where to place her anymore. That unsettled her more than mockery ever had. She gathered her tray and stood. The familiar ache settled into her spine as she straightened, not sharp, just present, like an old companion that refused to leave. She walked out into the cool night air, the smell of dust and oil grounding her. The stars over Wyoming were mercilessly bright. Too many of them, always had been. She didn't see the young recruit until he spoke. "Sergeant." His voice was tentative, careful. Grace stopped but didn't turn right away. She knew that tone. She'd worn it once. "Yes," she said finally. Private Keller stood a few steps back, hands clenched around the straps of his pack like they might float away. He looked younger than he had that morning, less certain. "I just wanted to say I didn't know." Grace faced him then, not sharply, just enough. Most people don't. He nodded, swallowing. "My brother served. He didn't come back the same either." Neither did I, Grace thought, but she didn't say it. Some truths didn't need air. Keller hesitated, then straightened. "I won't forget today." Grace studied his face, not searching for admiration, searching for sincerity. She found it. That mattered more than words. "Good," she said. "Forgetting gets people killed." He nodded again and stepped back as if released. Grace watched him go, feeling something loosen in her chest. Not peace. Not yet, but something closer to purpose. Sleep didn't come easily that night. It never did. When she closed her eyes, she wasn't in her quarters. She was back on the ice, wind screaming, fingers numb, the weight on her back shifting with every uneven step. She heard the same words again, whispered through cracked lips. "Don't stop." Grace sat up before dawn, breath sharp, heart steady. She waited for the ghosts to fade. They didn't. They never did. They simply learned to walk beside her instead of in front. By the time the sun rose, she was already on the field. The recruits arrived in ones and twos, slowing when they saw her. She wasn't barking orders, wasn't packing. She was running drills alone, precision movements, controlled, ruthless. Every motion had intent, not flashy, efficient. Huxley arrived late. Grace noticed without reacting. She always noticed. He stood stiff now, eyes forward, mouth tight. No smirk, no swagger. The silence around him was louder than anything he'd said the day before. She let it sit. "Form up," she said eventually. Her voice was calm, flat, no edge. That was worse. They moved fast, faster than yesterday. Fear sharpened them, respect steadied them. Grace saw it in their posture, in their breathing. She didn't comment, she didn't need to. Training began simply, too simply. Basic movement, endurance drills, navigation under pressure. Grace watched them struggle with things that looked easy on paper and impossible in practice. She didn't rescue them, didn't correct every mistake. She let consequences teach where comfort would have failed. By midday, frustration crept in. Again, she said, after watching a maneuver collapse for the third time. A few groans slipped out before anyone could stop them. Grace tilted her head slightly. "You tired?" No one answered. "Good," she said. "That means you're honest." She moved through them then, adjusting a grip here, a stance there. Her touch was brief, professional, but every correction carried weight, not because she demanded it, because she embodied it. Huxley struggled, not physically, mentally. Grace saw it in the way his jaw worked, the way his eyes flicked toward her and away again. He wasn't used to being unseen or unimportant. During a break, he spoke. "Sergeant," he said, voice tight, "permission to ask a question." Grace studied him, not as a superior, as a measure. "Ask." He hesitated. "Why didn't you say anything yesterday?" A fair question, a dangerous one. Grace didn't answer right away. She looked past him, toward the horizon where the land stretched empty and unforgiving. "Because if I need to explain myself," she said quietly, "I've already failed." His brow furrowed. "But—" "Because," she continued, cutting him off without raising her voice, "the kind of strength that needs to announce itself usually doesn't last." Silence fell between them, not hostile, reflective. Huxley nodded once, slower than before. He stepped back into line without another word. That night Grace sat alone again, but not unnoticed. The general found her there, coffee untouched between them. He didn't speak at first. Neither did she. They understood that about each other. "You didn't have to stay," Barkley said eventually. Grace's eyes stayed on the window. "I know. You could have taken an easier post." She almost smiled, almost. Easy doesn't teach. Barkley studied her profile, the scars, the stillness. "They'll test you," he said. "Some already have." Grace nodded. "They should." He leaned back. "You're carrying a lot." Grace finally met his eyes. "So are they," she said. "They just don't know it yet." When he left, she sat there a long time, listening to the hum of the bass, feeling the weight of the choice she'd made settle deeper, not as burden but as anchor. She wasn't here to relive the past. She was here to make sure it didn't repeat. And somewhere between the scars and the silence, between the ghosts and the drills, Grace Mallory felt it again. Not pride, not relief. Responsibility. Sometimes, survival isn't about making it out alive. Sometimes it's about going back in, so others don't have to bleed the same way you did. Why did her hand start shaking the moment the briefing room doors sealed shut? The sound was soft, almost nothing. A muted hydraulic sigh as steel met steel, but to Grace it landed like a hammer. Sealed rooms always did that to her. Too controlled, too final. No wind, no horizon, just walls that decided how much air you deserved. She flexed her fingers slowly, keeping them low, out of sight. The tremor faded. It always did, eventually. She took a breath and focused on the screen at the front of the room as the projector flickered to life. This wasn't a normal training brief. The recruits felt it too. They sat straighter than usual, less restless, no whispered jokes. The casual edge had been shaved off them over the last week, replaced with something rower, something closer to fear but not quite. Anticipation, maybe. Or the early stages of understanding that training wasn't about passing. It was about surviving what didn't care if you passed or not. Grace stood at the side of the room, arms folded loosely, eyes scanning faces. She wasn't looking for confidence. She was looking for cracks. "Scenario-based evaluation," the instructor at the podium said. "Live terrain, limited comms, unpredictable variables. Grace almost smiled, almost. The screen shifted. Satellite imagery, rugged terrain, sharp elevation changes, snow lines near the peaks. Her chest tightened. Not here, she thought, anywhere but here. The terrain wasn't the land divide, but it was close enough that her body didn't care about the difference. Muscles remembered before her mind could argue. Cold, distance, exposure, the kind of place where mistakes didn't forgive you later. She felt it then, that familiar internal conflict, the quiet tug-of-war she lived with every day. Part of her wanted to step back, to let another instructor take point, to claim objectivity. Another part, the louder one, knew that avoidance was just fear dressed up as discipline. Grace stepped forward. "I'll be overseeing this exercise," she said. Heads turned, some surprised, some relieved. A few, Huxley included, looked uneasy. Good, she thought. Uneasy meant awake. Out in the field, the weather shifted faster than predicted. Clouds rolled low, swallowing the ridgeline in gray. Grace watched the recruits adjust gear, hands clumsier in the cold. She corrected silently where needed. She let smaller errors stand. This wasn't punishment, this was truth. They moved out in teams. Grace followed at a distance, observing patterns. Who took initiative, who waited to be told, who panicked when plans bent instead of broke. Keller led his team too cautiously, afraid to be wrong. Grace made a mental note. Huxley moved too fast, overcompensating, trying to outrun yesterday. Grace felt the first warning sign in her ribs about an hour in, a sharp pull when she stepped down hard on uneven ground. She adjusted her gait without breaking stride. Pain was information, nothing more. The radio crackled. Interference. Terrain doing what terrain always did, refusing to cooperate. Then someone went down. It wasn't dramatic, no shout, just a slip on loose rock and a sharp cry swallowed by wind. Grace was moving before the call finished transmitting. She reached them fast, too fast, one part of her whispered. The memory surged without permission, snow, blood, weight. Focus, she told herself, now is not then. The recruit was conscious. Ankle twisted, painful but not catastrophic, panic made it worse. Grace knelt, steady hands assessing. Breathe, she said quietly, not a command, an anchor. The recruit latched onto her voice immediately. Grace felt it, that transfer of trust, heavy, dangerous, necessary. They stabilized the injury. Grace forced herself to let the team take the lead on the evac decision. It was the right call. She approved it without comment. As they moved out, the wind howled harder. Visibility dropped. And something inside Grace cracked. Not enough to show, enough to hurt. She stepped away from the group under the pretense of checking perimeter lines. Her breath shortened. The cold crept under her gear like a memory with fingers. She closed her eyes for 1 second too long. She was back there again, crawling, counting steps because names hurt too much, hearing the dead over the living. Her hands shook again, harder this time. Grace dropped to one knee, pretending to adjust a strap. Her heart pounded, not from exertion, from fear she hated admitting still lived in her. I survived, she told herself. I'm here. But survival wasn't the same as freedom. A shadow fell across her. She looked up to see Huxley standing there, face tight with concern he hadn't learned how to hide yet. "Sergeant," he said, "you okay?" The irony almost made her laugh. She considered brushing him off. That would have been easier, cleaner. Instead, she met his eyes. "I'm managing," she said honestly. He nodded, uncertain. Then quietly, "You don't have to carry it all alone." The word surprised them both. Grace searched his face, not for weakness, for intent. She found neither pity nor judgment there, just effort. "That's not how this works," she said gently. "Maybe it should be," he replied. Silence stretched between them. The wind filled it. Grace stood slowly, testing her weight. pain flared, then settled. "Get back to your team," she said. He hesitated, then obeyed. Grace watched him go, something shifting in her chest. Not forgiveness, understanding. The exercise ended early due to weather. No one complained. They were too cold, too tired, too thoughtful. Back at base, the recruits were quieter than she'd ever seen them. Not broken, changed. Grace sat alone in the locker room afterward, staring at her hands. Still scarred, still steady. She thought about what Huxley had said, about how leadership wasn't just about enduring. It was about knowing when endurance became isolation. That night she wrote in a small notebook she rarely opened. Not a report, not a debrief. Just one line. "You can be strong and still need help." She closed the book and set it away. Tomorrow they would train again, push harder, learn more. And Grace would stand with them, not above, not behind. Because sometimes the bravest thing a survivor can do isn't to stay silent. It's to keep going, without pretending the weight doesn't exist. Why did the alarm sound different when it woke her this time? Grace knew every tone the base used, training alerts, weather warnings, medical calls. This one wasn't loud. It didn't scream. It pulsed, steady, deliberate. The kind of sound meant to pull you out of sleep without panic and keep you there once you were awake. She was on her feet before the second pulse ended. For a moment she didn't know where she was. That happened sometimes. Her body woke faster than her mind, defaulting to old routines. Hand to the edge of the bunk, feet planted, breath measured. Only then did the room come back into focus. Bare walls, neatly folded gear, the faint smell of disinfectant and dust. She dressed quickly, movements economical. The pain in her ribs was worse this morning, deeper. She acknowledged it and set it aside. Pain didn't decide priorities, it never had. Outside, the corridor hummed with motion. Instructors moving with purpose. Recruits spilling from quarters, eyes sharp with confusion and adrenaline. Grace caught fragments of conversation as she moved. Not a drill. Communications went dark. Search and recovery. Her stomach tightened. By the time she reached the operations room, the screens were already lit. Maps layered with live feeds, weather patterns, terrain overlays. General Barkley stood at the center, expression carved from stone. He looked up when Grace entered. "You're early," he said. "I usually am," she replied. He nodded once. "We lost contact with a two-man recon team during a night navigation exercise. Terrain shift. Weather moved faster than forecast." Grace studied the map. Her eyes traced elevation lines instinctively. She felt it again, that pull, the quiet gravity of places like this. How long have they been dark? 3 hours. Too long, long enough for mistakes to compound. They were supposed to check in every 40 minutes, Barkley continued. Last transmission was garbled, possible injury. Grace didn't ask the question forming in her chest. She already knew the answer. "We need eyes on the ground," Barkley said. "I want you leading the recovery." The room went still. Grace felt the weight of it settle, not on her shoulders but somewhere deeper. Old scars tightening, old ghosts stirring. "Sir," she said carefully, "there are other instructors." "I know," Barkley interrupted. His voice softened just enough to matter. "I also know you." That was the problem. Grace exhaled slowly. "Then you know I won't say no." "I know," he said again. "That's why I'm asking." She turned to the room. The recruits assigned to the exercise stood near the back, faces pale but focused. Keller was there. Huxley too. Both of them met her eyes without looking away. Grace made a decision. "I'll take a small team," she said. "Fast, quiet." Barkley nodded. "Pick who you need." Grace didn't hesitate. They moved out within minutes. The air outside had teeth now, wind cutting across the terrain, dragging fog low over the ground. Visibility shrank with every step. Grace led from the front, always had. not because she needed to prove anything, but because she trusted her instincts more than anyone else in places like this. The terrain fought them immediately. Loose rock, steep drops hidden by mist, every sound carried strangely, distorted by wind. Grace signaled for silence. The team obeyed without question. They followed the last known coordinates, moving methodically. Grace kept her pace steady, forcing herself not to rush. Rushing got people hurt. Her radio crackled once, static, then nothing. Her pulse ticked up. She forced it down. They found the first sign 20 minutes in. A dropped marker, scuffed ground. Someone had gone down hard. Grace crouched, fingers brushing the dirt. Fresh, her jaw tightened. Split, she signaled. Two pairs fanned out while she continued forward. With every step, memory pressed closer. The cold felt the same, the silence too loud. Her breath sounded wrong in her ears. She caught herself counting steps again. Stop, she thought, stay here. A shout cut through the fog, short, sharp, human. Grace was moving before anyone else reacted. They found the first recon soldier slumped against a rock face, one arm held tight to his side. Alive, shivering, eyes wide with relief when he saw her. Easy, Grace said, kneeling. Her voice was calm, steady. She checked him quickly. Broken ribs, shock setting in. Where's your partner? She asked. The soldier swallowed. He went ahead, said he'd get higher ground for signal. Grace closed her eyes for half a second. Of course he did. She stood. Stabilize him, she ordered the team. I'm going after the other. Sergeant, Keller started. Grace met his eyes. That's an order. He nodded, jaw tight. She moved alone. The fog thickened as she climbed. Wind roared louder, tearing at her gear. The pain in her ribs flared with every breath. She ignored it. She'd ignored worse. Then she saw him. He was down near the edge of a drop, leg twisted beneath him at an unnatural angle. Conscious. Barely. His eyes flicked toward her, unfocused. Grace slid down beside him carefully. You did good, she said quietly, even as she assessed the damage. You're not alone. His breathing hitched. I thought I screwed up. Grace shook her head. You're still breathing. That means the story isn't over. She worked quickly, efficiently, splinted the leg, secured him. Her hands shook not from fear but from strain. She forced them steady. The wind howled louder. The fog closed in. And then her radio died completely. For a moment the world narrowed to two people, a broken signal, and a lot of bad options. Grace felt the old fear rise, the one she hated most, the one that whispered, you've been here before. She looked at the soldier, young, scared, trusting her with everything he had left. She made a choice. Listen to me, she said, leaning close so he could hear her over the wind. I'm going to get you out, but you need to stay with me. He nodded weakly. Grace began the slow, brutal process of moving him, inch by inch, step by step. Pain tore through her ribs, sharp enough to make her vision blur. She welcomed it. Pain kept her anchored in the present. By the time they reached the rendezvous point, Grace was shaking. Sweat chilled instantly against her skin. The team rushed forward, relief breaking through discipline. They got the wounded soldiers out. Medics took over. Hands guided Grace toward a seat. She waved them off. I'm fine. Barkley found her later, sitting alone on a crate, staring at the ground. You didn't have to do that alone, he said. Grace didn't look up. I know. You still did. Yes. He waited. I needed to, she added finally. Not for them, for me. He nodded. Did it help? Grace considered the question, thought of the fog, the fear, the choice. Yes, she said quietly, a little. That night, as the base settled back into uneasy calm, the recruits talked in hushed voices. Not about the rescue, not about her. About what it meant to keep going when everything in you wanted to stop. Grace lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her body ached. Her mind was quieter than it had been in years. Sometimes healing doesn't come from avoiding the edge. Sometimes it comes from standing there again and choosing once more to pull someone back with you. Why did the applause feel heavier than the silence ever had? It started the moment Grace stepped onto the field. Not loud, not dramatic, just hands coming together, uncertain at first, scattered then steady. A sound she hadn't invited, a sound she hadn't earned today, at least not in the way people thought. She stopped walking. The recruits froze too, realizing too late what they were doing. Some lowered their hands immediately, embarrassed. Others kept clapping, unsure how to stop without making it worse. Grace raised one hand. The applause died. "Don't," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't sharp. It didn't need to be. "If you clap every time someone does their job," she added, "you'll miss the moment it actually matters." No one argued. No one smiled. They listened. That was new. The incident spread fast across Fort Kessler. It always did. A live recovery. A senior instructor leading from the front. Someone getting hurt but not lost. By afternoon, Grace could feel the shift everywhere she went. Eyes lingering longer, conversations pausing mid-sentence when she passed. She hated it. Attention felt like exposure. Like someone shining a light on scars she preferred to keep covered. She hadn't come back to be seen. She'd come back to be useful. In the medical wing, she sat on the edge of an exam table while a young medic wrapped fresh tape around her ribs. He tried not to stare. Failed. "You should have called for backup sooner," he said, not accusing, just worried. Grace nodded. "You're right." He blinked. "You agree." "Doesn't mean I'd do it differently," she said. He shook his head, half amused, half exasperated. "You're impossible." She almost smiled. Later that evening, General Barkley called her into his office. The blinds were half drawn, late sunlight stripping the room in gold and shadow. He didn't ask her to sit. She didn't. "You scared a few people today," he said. Grace folded her hands behind her back. "Good. I'm serious." "So am I," she replied. "Fear sharpens attention." He studied her for a long moment. "You crossed a line." Grace met his gaze, didn't flinch. "I crossed a memory." Barkley exhaled slowly. "You can't keep carrying this alone, Grace." "I'm not," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "I'm carrying it with purpose now," she clarified. "There's a difference." Silence settled between them, not tense, weighted, honest. "You're changing them," Barkley said finally. "The recruits." Grace thought of Keller, moving with more confidence. Of Huxley, quieter now, watching more than talking. Of the way they'd reacted in the field, not waiting, not freezing. "They're changing themselves," she said. "I'm just in the way." Barkley gave a faint, tired smile. "You always were." That night, Grace dreamed without Snow for the first time in years. Instead, she dreamed of a door. It stood alone in an empty field, battered, scarred, but upright. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. Just knowing it was there was enough. She woke before dawn, heart steady. Training intensified after that. Grace pushed harder, not physically but mentally. She introduced uncertainty. Took away comforts they hadn't realized they relied on. She didn't explain why. She never did. Frustration surfaced, doubt, anger. "Good." During one exercise, Keller froze mid-decision, eyes darting to her instinctively. Grace didn't move, didn't rescue him with a nod or a word. He swallowed, chose, acted. It wasn't perfect, but it was his. Afterward, he approached her, breath still uneven. "I almost waited for you," he admitted. Grace nodded, and then I remembered you wouldn't come." A corner of her mouth lifted. "Now you're learning." Huxley changed too, more subtly. He asked fewer questions, better ones. When others spoke, he listened. When mistakes happened, he owned his part without excuses. One evening, he lingered after drills. "I was wrong," he said finally. "No theatrics, no justification." Grace wiped her hands on a rag. "Yes." He waited. She didn't say more. "That's it?" he asked. "That's enough," she replied. Something loosened in his shoulders. Not forgiven, released. Weeks passed. The bass settled into a new rhythm. Not easier, just more honest. Grace still ate alone sometimes. Other nights, a seat across from her filled without comment. She didn't invite it. She didn't push it away. One night Keller spoke up quietly. "Why do you stay, Sergeant?" Grace paused mid-bite. "Consider the question." "Because leaving would be easier," she said. They absorbed that. Later, alone in her quarters, Grace opened her notebook again, flipped past old pages she rarely read. She wrote another line. "Staying is a choice I make every day." Her ribs still hurt. Some mornings the weight pressed down harder than others, but something inside her had shifted. The memories didn't own the future anymore. They informed it. Grace knew she couldn't save everyone. That lesson had been carved into her long ago. But she could prepare the ones who came after her. She could teach them that strength wasn't loud, that leadership didn't announce itself, that scars weren't shameful, they were instructions written in skin. Outside, the base lights hummed against the dark. Grace lay back on her bunk, eyes open, breathing slow. For the first time since Operation Ghost Line, she didn't feel like she was running from the past. She felt like she was standing in front of it, steady, unflinching, and finally ready to let it fall behind her. Why did the quiet feel final the morning she stood in front of them for the last time? It wasn't announced. No orders posted. No rumors racing through the barracks. Grace arrived at the field before dawn as she always did, breath fogging lightly in the cold, boots finding their places by memory alone. The sky was just beginning to lighten, that thin gray blue that came before color, a moment between states. She stood there, hands behind her back, and waited. One by one the recruits arrived, Keller first, then two more, then Huxley moving slower than usual, eyes sharper. No one spoke. No one needed to. Something in the air told them this wasn't another drill. Grace watched them form up, straighter than they had weeks ago, quieter too, not because they were afraid, but because they were listening. She felt the weight then, not the old one, not the ghosts. This was different. Completion. She hadn't planned to say anything. Speeches were for people who needed to be remembered. She didn't. Everything she wanted them to carry had already been given, through exhaustion, through uncertainty, through moments where she hadn't stepped in when they wanted her to. But silence, she'd learned, could mean many things. Today it meant choice. She stepped forward. "Look around," Grace said, voice calm, steady, carrying easily in the open air. "This is the last time I'll ask you to do that as your instructor." A ripple moved through the formation, subtle, controlled. Keller's jaw tightened. Huxley's eyes flicked up, then locked forward again. Grace continued. "You've trained for environments that don't care who you are. You've learned that plans break, bodies fail, and confidence lies to you at the worst possible moment." She paused, let that land. "You won't always have a leader in front of you," she said. "Sometimes you'll be it. Sometimes you'll wish you were." Her ribs ached. The cold slipped through her gear. She welcomed both. They reminded her she was here, now. "You think strength is pushing through pain," she went on. "Sometimes it is. But more often, strength is knowing when to slow down, when to listen, when to let someone else carry the weight, even if you're capable of carrying it yourself." Huxley swallowed. Grace saw it. "I didn't come back to teach you how to be fearless," she said. "Fear keeps you alive. I came back to teach you how to move anyway." She stepped back into line. "That's all." No applause, no cheers. Just stillness. And then, without instruction, the recruits came to attention. Not because protocol demanded it. Because they chose to. Grace held it for a moment longer, then nodded once and turned away. She didn't look back. By midday, her locker was empty. The base felt different as she walked through it for the last time, not lighter, not heavier. Honest. People didn't stop her, didn't thank her. They met her eyes, that was enough. General Barkley waited near the exit, hands clasped behind his back as always. He didn't pretend this was a coincidence. "You sure?" he asked. Grace adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. "I am." "You could stay," he said. "There's always another class." She met his gaze, and they'd start watching me instead of themselves. He nodded slowly. "You taught them well." Grace considered that. "They taught me too." He hesitated, then extended his hand. She took it. No salute, no rank between them, just two people who understood what it meant to carry things no one else could see. As she walked past the gate, the wind picked up sharp, clean, Wyoming stretching wide and empty beyond the fence. Grace paused for a moment, letting the cold fill her lungs. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was leaving something unfinished. Weeks later, during a night exercise, a sudden storm rolled in faster than forecast. Visibility dropped, comms fractured, the terrain turned unforgiving. Keller took point. His team faltered once, then adjusted. Huxley rerouted without waiting for approval. Another recruit made the call to pull back early, sacrificing a clean run for a safe one. No one panicked. No one froze. They adapted. Back at base, soaked and exhausted, Keller found himself staring at the field where Grace used to stand. He didn't know why, just felt like he should. "She would have liked that," Huxley said quietly, appearing beside him. Keller nodded. "Yeah." They didn't say her name again. Far from Fort Kessler, Grace Mallory stood alone on a ridge at sunrise. No uniform, no call sign, just a woman with scars that no longer dictated her direction. She breathed in the cold air and let it go. The memories were still there. They always would be, but they no longer demanded her attention at every step. She had done what she came to do. She had returned to the fire, not to relive it, not to conquer it, but to light the way through it for others. Grace turned toward the horizon and started walking. Not away from who she'd been, but forward at last, as someone who had learned that dignity doesn't shout. Strength doesn't need witnesses. And the most powerful legacy isn't the story people tell about you. It's the way they stand when you're no longer there to show them how.